The low hum of the jet engines on the private tarmac was almost drowned out by Marcus Hall's racing thoughts. He had every reason to feel victorious. His name was on the plane's ownership papers. But when he stepped on board in an understated navy suit and a well-worn leather bag, he was met with suspicion instead of respect. When the flight took off, a collision of worlds attendant Lisa Rogers walked up to him. Her sharp voice cut through the air in the cabin like a blade. She didn't see him as the powerful man running global ventures. She thought he was out of place and needed to be fixed. Marcus's calm answer only seemed to confirm her assumption. "Sir, you'll need to move," she insisted. What she didn't know, what no one on board suspected, was that the man she just dismissed owned not only the first-class seat she was guarding, but every inch of the plane itself. The mysteries of owning things. This isn't just another travel accident. It's a clash of truth and perception that will make you think. In new real-life stories, we look at what happens when someone faces prejudice with strength and poise, turning an act of disrespect into a chance to make a difference. Stay tuned to find out how this flight changed not only a life but also a business. When Marcus Hall got on the sleek private jet, the cool leather duffel over his shoulder felt lighter than the weight of the demands that came with it. He had learned early on how to handle problems with calm. The world saw a millionaire, but he knew what people thought about him based on those assumptions, which would come to the fore today in a way that not even he had seen coming. The cabin was spotless, with a level of luxury that whispered of exclusivity. Marcus found his seat and settled in quietly. He avoided the gazes of the few passengers already seated, his calm demeanor masking a lifetime of facing subtle slights. Not long after, a tall woman in a perfectly pressed suit walked up. Her tight, professional smile showed that she was working hard. "Excuse me, sir," Lisa Rogers began, her tone carrying the crispness of authority. "This section is reserved. If you'll please move to the back of the plane, I'd appreciate it." Marcus had heard those words before. They were assumptions wrapped in politeness but used like judgments. He looked her in the eye and said, "I think I'm in the right seat." Her smile faded and was replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Sir, I don't want to make this difficult." "Let's avoid a scene," she said. Marcus studied her for a moment, the stress rippling through her stance like a thread pulled taut. He could have ended standing firm against shadows if they revealed everything, but something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps a need to see how far she would go to defend an assumption that had no ground to stand on. Instead of explaining, he reached into his pocket and produced his boarding pass. Holding it out without a word, Lisa snatched it. With practiced speed, barely glancing at the details before handing it back. "There's clearly been a mistake," she said, her tone growing sharper. "I'll check with the crew." She left without waiting for an answer, and Marcus leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable around him. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to watch, while others traded whispers. He could feel the weight of their stares, curious, skeptical, and in some cases accusatory. He'd been here before. The stage was new, but the performance was familiar. Lisa returned moments later, her jaw set. "Sir, this seat is reserved for premium passengers. You'll need to move now." The air in the cabin thickened with stress. Marcus straightened slightly, his voice calm, but with an edge that cut through the rising noise. "I think it's time you take a closer look." He reached into his jacket and retrieved a slim leather folder, putting it on the tray table between them. His movements were measured, not rushed, as he flipped it open. Lisa hesitated, her confidence faltering for the first time. He slid a single sheet of paper toward her. Lisa picked it up, her eyes scanning the document. The logo at the top was unmistakable, bold and authoritative. Her gaze shifted to the name at the bottom, and her breath hitched. Marcus Hall, owner. Her posture, the bombshell that changed everything, stiffened, but her face revealed her shock. "Mr. Hall," she stammered the words, struggling to find their way out. I didn't realize." "No, you didn't," Marcus replied, his voice steady, his gaze unyielding. "But you assumed." For a moment, silence consumed the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, straining to hear. Lisa's hands trembled as she handed the doctor back, her professional mask slipping. "I deeply apologize," she said, her voice softer now. "I didn't mean." "I know what you meant," Marcus interrupted, his tone firm but devoid of anger. "And that's the problem." Her lips parted as if to answer, but the arrival of the captain cut her off. He glanced between them, his face a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his words measured. Marcus, authority meets accountability, handed him another paper from his folder, watching as the captain's brow furrowed in recognition. He turned to Lisa, his tone formal. "Miss Rogers, I'd like to speak with you privately." Lisa nodded stiffly, following him to the galley. Marcus watched them go, then leaned back in his seat, his calm exterior betraying none of the frustration simmering beneath. The murmurs around him grew louder. Piecing together the puzzle of who he was and what had just unfolded. Marcus ignored them, He wasn't here to perform for an audience in the galley. Lisa's world was unraveling. The captain's words were low but firm, each one chipping away at her confidence. "You try to remove the owner of this plane from his seat," he said directly. "Do you understand the gravity of this mistake?" Her answer was quiet, almost inaudible. "I didn't know. I thought you thought wrong." He cut her off. "And now you'll have to deal with the consequences." Lisa returned to the cabin with a subdued demeanor, her head bowed slightly as she approached Marcus once more. "Mr. Hall," she began, her voice trembling, "I can't explain how sorry I am for my actions. It was unprofessional and unfair." Marcus met her gaze, his expression inscrutable. "Leighton, move on," he said, simply turning back to his notebook. But as the plane climbed to cruising altitude, the atmosphere in the cabin remained thick with unease for Marcus. The encounter was another reminder of the battles he'd fought his entire life, battles not against wealth or power, but against perception. The assumptions people made about him based solely on appearance had shaped his journey in ways most couldn't understand, from conflict to catalyst. Yet he knew he couldn't let moments like this pass without addressing the deeper problem they represented. When the plane landed, Marcus disembarked quietly, his focus already shifting to the next step. This wasn't about a single incident, it was about dismantling the mindset that allowed such incidents to occur. He contacted the airline's executive team, setting in motion a plan that would challenge the culture within their organization. Weeks later, Marcus sat across from the airline's leadership in a glass-walled conference room, his presence commanding respect. "What happened on that flight isn't an isolated incident," he began. "It's a symptom of a larger problem, one we need to address." The room fell silent as he outlined his proposals, a comprehensive strategy to combat bias and foster inclusion. His words were deliberate, each one carrying the weight of his experience. But by the time he finished, there was no room for debate. Back on the ground, Lisa Rogers was embarking on her own journey of accountability. Her conversations with Marcus had ignited a transformation, one she was determined to see through. As she completed diversity training and reflected on her actions, she began to see the world and her role in it through a different lens. For Marcus, the confrontation wasn't about vindication, it was about creating a rip of change, one that extended beyond himself to touch the lives of those who came after. Because in his world, success wasn't just about rising above, it was about lifting others along the way. As Marcus Hall stood by the window of his office, the city lights stretching into the horizon, his thoughts returned to the flight that had changed more than just one day. It wasn't just about a confrontation or a mistaken identity, it was about the assumptions that had silently shaped lives, including his own. Ripples of transformation. Marcus knew his success didn't exempt him from prejudice, but it gave him the tools to challenge it. That's what drove him to act, not just for himself, but for those who couldn't. Across the airline, the ripples of his actions began to take form. Policies were revised, training sessions became more meaningful, and conversations about bias sparked new awareness. Lisa Rogers, once a symbol of the problem, had become part of the solution. Her growth wasn't just a result of consequence, but a testament to the power of reflection and responsibility. For Marcus, the lesson was clear: transformation doesn't come from anger or avoidance, it comes from deliberate action. He had turned a moment of personal offense into an opportunity for collective progress. As he closed his notebook and prepared for another day, Marcus's resolve was steady. The world wasn't perfect, but step by step it could be. A movement begins better. If this story moved you, join us in amplifying real-life lessons that question prejudice and inspire change. Like, share, and help new real-life stories reach 10,000 subscribers. To continue sharing these powerful tales, let's shape a more inclusive future together. Music.